Chosen one, before you open another app, before you scroll anywhere else, before you let the noise of the day take over your attention, I need you to pause here for a moment. Because this message is not random, and the timing of you hearing this right now matters more than you realize. One message, just one, has the potential to change the direction of your entire week. But only if you hear it before the world fills your mind with everything else it wants you to believe. You see, the first thing most people do when they wake up, or when they pick up their phone, is open the same apps that feed them noise. Notifications, opinions, distractions, comparisons, other people's problems, other people's lives, other people's energy. And before they even realize it, their mind is already crowded. Their focus is already scattered. Their peace is already negotiated away before the day has even started. But chosen one, this week cannot begin that way for you. Not this time. Because something important is shifting in your life right now, even if the physical evidence has not fully appeared yet. There is movement happening around you that most people cannot see. Conversations are aligning. Decisions are being made in rooms you have never entered. Doors are being considered that your name is about to walk through. And at the same time, certain distractions are trying to reach you early, because distraction always tries to arrive before destiny. That is why you needed to hear this message first. Because what you hear first shapes how you interpret everything that comes after. If the first voice you hear is fear, you will see problems all day. If the first voice you hear is comparison, you will feel behind all day. If the first voice you hear is negativity, you will expect conflict all day. But if the first voice you hear reminds you who you actually are, reminds you what is actually unfolding, reminds you what has actually been working behind the scenes, then your entire posture changes. And that is what this message is doing for you right now. Chosen one, this week is not ordinary for you. You may wake up thinking it is just another routine stretch of days, just another sequence of work, responsibilities, conversations, and small decisions. But spiritually, energetically, and mentally, something is aligning that you have been waiting for longer than you realize. The reason you feel slightly restless lately, the reason your mind has been reflecting on certain past moments, the reason certain people or ideas keep resurfacing in your thoughts is because your life is standing at the edge of a small shift that is going to influence several things around you at once. And the shift itself is not loud. It will not necessarily arrive as a dramatic announcement. Most of the time, the moments that change an entire week begin quietly. A message arrives, a conversation happens, a decision becomes clear. A piece of information reaches you at the exact moment you needed it. A misunderstanding gets resolved. A delay suddenly moves forward. A person who has been distant reaches out. A door you thought was closed reveals another handle. But if your mind is already overwhelmed with noise, you can miss the significance of these small turning points. That is why this message had to reach you before the noise did. Because chosen one, your attention this week is more powerful than you realize. Where you place it will determine what grows. What you believe early in the week will quietly guide every choice that follows. If you begin the week feeling small, uncertain, and reactive, you will walk past opportunities without even recognizing them. But if you begin the week centered, aware, and grounded in who you are becoming, you will notice openings that most people walk straight past. And right now, your awareness is being sharpened for a reason. Think about the last few days. Think about the subtle things that have been happening. Maybe certain situations have been wrapping up. Maybe certain conversations have been revealing people's true intentions. Maybe certain delays that once frustrated you are starting to make more sense. Maybe you are beginning to see why some doors had to close earlier than you wanted them to. Chosen one, many things that once felt like obstacles were actually clearing space. Space for new timing, space for clearer decisions, Space for the right connections to find you without interference. And this week, that cleared space begins to matter. But here is the part many people miss. When life is about to shift slightly in your favor, distraction increases at the exact same time. Suddenly, more people want your attention. Suddenly, more random problems appear. Suddenly, your mind wants to revisit old worries. Suddenly, small annoyances feel bigger than they really are. That is not coincidence. It is what happens when your focus becomes valuable. Because the easiest way to stop someone from stepping into the right moment is not to block the moment itself. It is to cloud their attention before the moment arrives. So they overlook it. They misread it. They react emotionally instead of responding wisely, and the opportunity passes quietly. But you are not stepping into this week the same way you stepped into the last one. Because now, you have been reminded. You have been reminded to slow your mind down. You have been reminded to observe more carefully. You have been reminded that something meaningful can arrive in a small form first. And when that message appears, when that conversation starts, when that unexpected moment shows up, you will recognize it differently than you would have yesterday. Chosen one. One message really can change a week. Sometimes it is encouragement arriving when you were about to quit. Sometimes it is information arriving before you make the wrong move. Sometimes it is clarity arriving about a person you were misjudging. Sometimes it is a simple reminder of your worth before you walk into a room that tries to shrink you. And sometimes it is exactly what you are hearing right now. A quiet alignment that prepares your mind before anything else tries to influence it. But the deeper reason you needed to hear this before opening another app is because the world trains people to start their day reacting. Reacting to notifications, reacting to headlines, reacting to other people's expectations, reacting to problems that are not even theirs. But chosen ones move differently. They observe first. They listen first. They anchor themselves first, and then they step into the day with clarity instead of chaos. So before you scroll, before you reply to anyone, before you start moving through the routines of the day, take one moment and remember this. This week is not random. Your attention is valuable, and the message that reaches you at the right moment can quietly redirect everything that follows. And the next part of this message is where things become even clearer, because there are 3 specific signs that will show up during your week that will confirm this shift is already unfolding. Chosen one. Now that you have heard this message before the noise of the day reaches you, there are 3 signs you need to watch for during this week. These signs are subtle, and most people miss them because they expect life to change with something dramatic. But real shifts rarely begin with drama. They begin with signals, small movements that only make sense if your mind is quiet enough to notice them. And this week, those signals are going to appear in ways that may seem ordinary at first, but they will carry meaning if you pay attention. The first sign is unexpected clarity about something that has been confusing you for a while. It may come through a conversation, a small piece of information, or even a sudden realization that arrives while you are doing something completely normal. Something that once felt complicated will suddenly look simple. Something that once felt uncertain will suddenly make sense. You may finally understand why a situation unfolded the way it did, why a person behaved the way they did, or why a door that once seemed important had to close earlier than you wanted it to. Clarity like this often arrives quietly, but when it does, it changes the way you move forward. Instead of carrying the mental weight of uncertainty, you start moving with understanding. Instead of replaying old questions, your mind begins to focus on what is next. And that shift in focus is powerful because confusion drains energy, while clarity releases it. When clarity arrives, decisions become easier, conversations become more direct, and the path in front of you stops feeling foggy. The second sign is a moment where your perspective changes about your own position. Chosen one, sometimes the biggest shift in a week is not something happening outside of you, but something happening inside your thinking. You may suddenly realize that you are further ahead than you thought. You may notice that a situation you once feared now feels manageable. You may see that the person who once had power over your emotions no longer affects you the same way. That realization may come while reflecting on something small, but when it happens, it changes your posture immediately. Perspective shifts are powerful because they remove invisible weight. Many people carry unnecessary pressure simply because they believe they are behind, or they believe they are powerless in a situation that actually has more options than they can see. When perspective changes, the pressure lifts. And once that pressure lifts, you start moving differently. Your tone changes. Your decisions become calmer. You stop reacting and start choosing. That is one of the quiet ways a week begins to transform. The third sign is a message, interaction, or opportunity appearing at the exact moment it becomes useful. It might be an email you are not expecting. It might be someone reaching out after a long silence. It might be information that arrives right before you make an important decision. It might even be something small, like a comment in conversation that gives you insight into something you are about to misunderstand. The important thing is that this moment will not feel random once it happens. When it appears, you will recognize that the timing is precise. It will connect to something you have been thinking about, something you have been waiting on, or something that has been forming quietly in the background of your life. And that is the moment where many people miss the opportunity, because they treat the message like any other moment instead of recognizing its timing. Chosen one. Timing matters more than people realize. A single conversation at the right moment can redirect an entire week. A single piece of information at the right moment can prevent the wrong move. A single reminder of who you are at the right moment can stop you from shrinking in a room where you are meant to stand with confidence. This is why the message you heard at the beginning matters. It prepares your awareness before the moment arrives. Now, here is the deeper part of what is happening this week. The reason your attention needed to be anchored early is because the environment around you may not immediately reflect the shift that is unfolding. Some parts of your week may still look ordinary. You may still go through the same routines, the same places, the same conversations. But within those familiar moments, new understanding is forming. And once understanding changes, the same environment begins to produce different results. Many people wait for life to change before they change their mindset. But the truth is often the opposite. When the mindset shifts first, life begins reorganizing around that shift. The decisions you make become clearer. The conversations you have become more direct. The people who resonate with your direction move closer, and the people who no longer align naturally fade into the background. That is why the beginning of your week had to start like this. Not with noise, not with comparison, not with distraction, but with awareness. Because awareness is what allows you to notice the moments that matter. And once you notice them, you can respond to them with intention instead of reacting blindly. Chosen one. Something interesting happens when a person begins a week with this level of awareness. They stop rushing through moments. They stop reacting to every notification as if it is urgent. They begin observing patterns that were always there, but were previously hidden by noise. And when patterns become visible, opportunities become visible as well. Think about it this way. Many people move through their week on autopilot. They wake up, check their phone, react to the first problem they see, move through their tasks quickly, and go to sleep feeling as though nothing meaningful happened. But the truth is that meaningful moments were present. They simply passed unnoticed because attention was elsewhere. But your attention has already been redirected, and that means when the first sign appears, you will notice it. When the second sign appears, you will understand it. And when the third sign appears, you will respond to it differently than you would have a week ago. That is how a week changes. Not always through one dramatic event, but through one message that shifts your awareness before anything else can shape your thinking. And there is one more thing you need to understand before this message ends, because the final part of this message explains why this particular week holds more significance than it first appears. and why the reminder you heard today may quietly influence decisions and outcomes for several days ahead. Chosen one, now that you have heard this message before the noise of the day reaches you, there are 3 signs you need to watch for during this week. These signs are subtle, and most people miss them because they expect life to change with something dramatic. But real shifts rarely begin with drama. They begin with signals, small movements that only make sense if your mind is quiet enough to notice them. And this week, those signals are going to appear in ways that may seem ordinary at first, but they will carry meaning if you pay attention. The first sign is unexpected clarity about something that has been confusing you for a while. It may come through a conversation, a small piece of information, or even a sudden realization that arrives while you are doing something completely normal. Something that once felt complicated will suddenly look simple. Something that once felt uncertain will suddenly make sense. You may finally understand why a situation unfolded the way it did, why a person behaved the way they did, or why a door that once seemed important had to close earlier than you wanted it to. Clarity like this often arrives quietly, but when it does, it changes the way you move forward. Instead of carrying the mental weight of uncertainty, you start moving with understanding. Instead of replaying old questions, your mind begins to focus on what is next. And that shift in focus is powerful, because confusion drains energy, while clarity releases it. When clarity arrives, decisions become easier, conversations become more direct, and the path in front of you stops feeling foggy. The second sign is a moment where your perspective changes about your own position. Chosen one, sometimes the biggest shift in a week is not something happening outside of you, but something happening inside your thinking. You may suddenly realize that you are further ahead than you thought. You may notice that a situation you once feared now feels manageable. You may see that the person who once had power over your emotions no longer affects you the same way. That realization may come while reflecting on something small, but when it happens, it changes your posture immediately. Perspective shifts are powerful because they remove invisible weight. Many people carry unnecessary pressure simply because they believe they are behind, or they believe they are powerless in a situation that actually has more options than they can see. When perspective changes, the pressure lifts. And once that pressure lifts, you start moving differently. Your tone changes. Your decisions become calmer. You stop reacting and start choosing. That is one of the quiet ways a week begins to transform. The third sign is a message, interaction, or opportunity appearing at the exact moment it becomes useful. It might be an email you are not expecting. It might be someone reaching out after a long silence. It might be information that arrives right before you make an important decision. It might even be something small, like a comment in conversation that gives you insight into something you are about to misunderstand. The important thing is that this moment will not feel random once it happens. When it appears, you will recognize that the timing is precise. It will connect to something you have been thinking about, something you have been waiting on, or something that has been forming quietly in the background of your life. And that is the moment where many people miss the opportunity, because they treat the message like any other moment instead of recognizing its timing. Chosen one, timing matters more than people realize. A single conversation at the right moment can redirect an entire week. A single piece of information at the right moment can prevent the wrong move. A single reminder of who you are at the right moment can stop you from shrinking in a room where you are meant to stand with confidence. This is why the message you heard at the beginning matters. It prepares your awareness before the moment arrives. Now, here is the deeper part of what is happening this week. The reason your attention needed to be anchored early is because the environment around you may not immediately reflect the shift that is unfolding. Some parts of your week may still look ordinary. You may still go through the same routines, the same places, the same conversations. But within those familiar moments, new understanding is forming. And once understanding changes, The same environment begins to produce different results. Many people wait for life to change before they change their mindset. But the truth is often the opposite. When the mindset shifts first, life begins reorganizing around that shift. The decisions you make become clearer. The conversations you have become more direct. The people who resonate with your direction move closer, and the people who no longer align naturally fade into the background. That is why the beginning of your week had to start like this. Not with noise, not with comparison, not with distraction, but with awareness. Because awareness is what allows you to notice the moments that matter. And once you notice them, you can respond to them with intention instead of reacting blindly. Chosen one, something interesting happens when a person begins a week with this level of awareness. They stop rushing through moments. They stop reacting to every notification as if it is urgent. They begin observing patterns that were always there, but were previously hidden by noise. And when patterns become visible, opportunities become visible as well. Think about it this way. Many people move through their week on autopilot. They wake up, check their phone, react to the first problem they see, move through their tasks quickly, and go to sleep feeling as though nothing meaningful happened. But the truth is that meaningful moments were present. They simply passed unnoticed because attention was elsewhere. But your attention has already been redirected, and that means when the first sign appears, you will notice it. When the second sign appears, you will understand it. And when the third sign appears, you will respond to it differently than you would have a week ago. That is how a week changes. Not always through one dramatic event, but through one message that shifts your awareness before anything else can shape your thinking. And there is one more thing you need to understand before this message ends, because the final part of this message explains why this particular week holds more significance than it first appears, and why the reminder you heard today may quietly influence decisions and outcomes for several days ahead. Chosen one, there is another reason this message had to reach you before you opened any other app, and it has to do with how easily attention can be redirected without you even realizing it. The world trains people to scatter their focus across dozens of small things every hour. And when focus becomes scattered, the mind begins reacting instead of observing. When the mind reacts, it loses the ability to recognize timing, and when timing is missed, opportunities pass quietly. This is why so many people look back at a week and feel as though nothing changed, even though several small moments could have shifted everything if they had been noticed at the right time. But this week is different for you because your awareness has already been adjusted before the week even fully begins. That means when certain moments appear, you will not dismiss them the way you might have before. You will feel a small pause in your thinking, the kind of pause that tells you something deserves a second look. Many people ignore those pauses because they are moving too quickly through their day. But those pauses are often the exact points where clarity tries to enter. This week, you may notice one of those pauses when a conversation turns in a direction you did not expect. When someone says something that suddenly makes an older situation make sense, or when an idea forms in your mind that feels unusually clear compared to the uncertainty you carried before. When that moment arrives, do not rush past it. Let your mind sit with it for a second longer than usual. Often, the mind tries to move forward too quickly, but insight requires a moment of stillness. Stillness allows patterns to become visible, and patterns reveal what random moments cannot. For example, you might suddenly notice how certain events from the past few weeks connect to something happening right now. You might see that a delay that frustrated you earlier actually prevented you from stepping into the wrong situation. You might see that a conversation you once felt confused by now makes sense because new information has quietly appeared. When these realizations happen, they change the way you move through the rest of the week, because you are no longer reacting blindly. Instead, you are responding with understanding. That difference alone can redirect several decisions without you even noticing it in the moment. Another thing you may notice this week is a shift in how people respond to your presence. This does not always mean something dramatic. Sometimes it appears in small ways. Someone may speak more honestly with you than usual. Someone who once seemed distant may suddenly open up about something they had been holding back. Someone may ask for your opinion in a moment where your perspective carries more weight than you expected. These moments happen because when your awareness changes, your energy changes as well. When you become calmer and more observant, people sense that stability. They feel safer speaking openly. They feel more comfortable revealing what they are actually thinking instead of hiding behind surface conversation. This may lead to a moment where you learn something valuable that was previously hidden from you. Information like that can quietly change the direction of a week because it gives you a clearer picture of what is happening around you. Instead of guessing, you understand. Instead of assuming, you see the pattern. That clarity can influence how you respond to certain people and how you choose where to invest your attention. Another thing that may happen this week is a sudden recognition of your own progress. This does not always come through achievement. Sometimes it arrives through contrast. You may notice that something which once triggered stress now feels manageable. You may realize that a person who once had a strong emotional impact on you no longer carries that same influence. You may see that you are making decisions faster because the doubt that used to slow you down has become quieter. These moments of recognition are important because they show you that growth has already been happening behind the scenes. Growth often feels invisible while it is occurring, but when the moment of recognition arrives, it becomes obvious. Suddenly you see that you are not standing in the same place mentally or emotionally that you were a few weeks ago. And when you see that clearly, your confidence shifts. Confidence is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the absence of hesitation. When hesitation fades, your actions become more direct, and direct action tends to produce clearer outcomes. That alone can influence how several situations unfold during the week. There is another subtle change you may notice as well. Your patience with unnecessary distractions may become lower than usual. Things that once held your attention easily may suddenly feel less interesting. Conversations that revolve around negativity or repetition may feel draining more quickly. This is not because you've become impatient with people. It is because your mind is becoming more selective with what it allows to occupy space. When your awareness increases, your tolerance for noise decreases. This is actually a positive sign because it means your focus is sharpening. Focus naturally pulls you toward things that matter and away from things that only consume energy. Many people ignore this signal and force themselves back into distractions out of habit. But if you allow your focus to follow what feels meaningful, you may notice that the week begins organizing itself differently. You may spend more time on actions that move something forward and less time reacting to things that do not contribute to your direction. And that is where the deeper shift begins to appear. Weeks rarely transform because of one large event. They transform because a series of small choices begins moving in a slightly different direction. A clearer thought leads to a better response. A better response leads to a better conversation. A better conversation leads to a new opportunity or understanding. And suddenly, by the end of the week, things look different than they did at the beginning. Many people call that luck or coincidence, but often it simply started with awareness. And awareness is exactly what this message was meant to give you before anything else reached your mind. The next part of this message explains the final reason this week matters and why the reminder you heard today may quietly influence decisions and outcomes over the next several days. Chosen one. There is another reason this message had to reach you before you opened any other app, and it has to do with how easily attention can be redirected without you even realizing it. Most people underestimate how powerful the first few moments of attention are in shaping the direction of an entire day or even an entire week. The mind is extremely responsive to the first signals it receives. When the first signal is chaos, the mind becomes reactive. When the first signal is comparison, the mind becomes insecure. When the first signal is pressure, the mind becomes defensive. But when the first signal is awareness, the mind becomes observant. And observation changes everything. Observation slows down the automatic reactions that usually control people's behavior. Instead of reacting instantly to whatever appears in front of them, an observant mind pauses. That pause may only last a few seconds, but in those seconds, something powerful happens. Perspective enters. Perspective allows you to see more than the surface of a situation. Instead of responding emotionally to the first interpretation that appears in your mind, you start noticing details that other people miss. The tone in someone's voice, the timing of a message, the pattern behind someone's actions, the meaning behind a situation that once looked random. And this week, that ability to observe is going to matter more than usual, because several small moments are going to appear that look ordinary to everyone else, but will carry information for you. They may appear as casual conversations, quick exchanges, or sudden realizations that arrive while you are doing something completely routine. Many people overlook these moments because they are busy reacting to distractions. But when your attention is calm and focused, those moments become visible. For example, there may be a moment this week where someone says something casually that reveals far more than they intended. It might be a comment about a situation you were uncertain about. It might be a small detail about someone's true intentions. It might be information that suddenly explains why something happened earlier in the month that did not make sense at the time. When that moment arrives, your mind will immediately recognize that the information connects to something larger. That is the power of awareness. Awareness allows you to connect pieces of information that previously felt unrelated. When the pieces connect, confusion disappears. And when confusion disappears, your next decision becomes clearer. Many people think clarity appears suddenly, out of nowhere. But most clarity is actually the result of several small pieces of information finally aligning in your mind. Another moment you may notice this week is a shift in how people interact with you. Sometimes this happens because your own mindset has changed. When you are centered and observant, your presence feels different to others. People sense that stability. They sense that you are not reacting emotionally to everything around you. And when people feel that kind of calm energy, they tend to become more honest around you. This honesty may reveal something useful. Someone may admit something they previously avoided saying. Someone may reveal their true opinion about a situation you were involved in. Someone may open up about an opportunity or idea that you had not considered before. These moments do not always look dramatic when they happen, but the information inside them can quietly change how you approach the rest of your week. There is also another shift that often appears when awareness increases. You begin noticing patterns in your own behavior. Chosen one, sometimes the most important realization during a week is not about someone else. It is about yourself. You may suddenly recognize that something you once worried about constantly no longer holds the same emotional weight. You may realize that you are making decisions faster because doubt has started fading. You may notice that your reactions are calmer, even when situations are slightly stressful. These realizations are important because they reveal growth that has already been happening behind the scenes. Growth rarely announces itself while it is occurring. It builds quietly through repeated experiences, reflections, and small adjustments in your thinking. Then one day, you notice the difference. Something that once triggered anxiety now feels manageable. Something that once confused you now seems obvious. Someone who once had emotional influence over you now feels distant from your thoughts. When you recognize these changes, your confidence shifts. Confidence is not always loud or dramatic. Often, it is simply the absence of hesitation. When hesitation disappears, your actions become more direct. When your actions become more direct, your results begin changing as well. This is one of the ways a week quietly transforms without a dramatic event announcing the shift. There is also another signal that may appear this week, and many people misunderstand it when it happens. You may suddenly feel less interested in certain distractions that once occupied your attention. Conversations that revolve around negativity may feel draining much faster than they used to. Endless scrolling or constant notifications may start feeling meaningless. This is not boredom, it is focus sharpening. When focus sharpens, the mind naturally begins filtering what deserves attention and what does not. Many people ignore this signal and return to distractions out of habit, but when you allow your focus to follow what feels meaningful, something interesting happens. Your time reorganizes itself. You spend more time on actions that move things forward and less time reacting to things that lead nowhere. And that is where the deeper shift begins. Weeks rarely change because of one large event. They change because a series of small choices begins moving in a slightly different direction. A clearer thought leads to a better response. A better response leads to a more productive conversation. A more productive conversation leads to an opportunity or understanding that was not visible before. By the end of the week, everything looks slightly different. Most people call this coincidence or luck, but in reality, it often begins with something simple: awareness before reaction. And that awareness is exactly what this message was meant to give you before anything else reached your mind. Now, there is one final piece you need to understand before this message ends, because the last part of this message explains why the timing of this week matters more than it first appears, and how the small shift in your awareness today may quietly influence several outcomes over the next few days. Chosen one, by now you can start to see why the timing of this message matters so much. It is not simply a motivational reminder or a moment of encouragement before the week begins. It is something more practical than that. It is a recalibration of attention. When attention changes, perception changes. And when perception changes, the same events that once felt confusing begin to reveal a clearer structure. That is why many people experience certain weeks as chaotic, while others experience those same weeks as productive or meaningful. The external environment may not change dramatically, but the internal filter through which it is interpreted becomes sharper. And that sharper filter is exactly what you are stepping into right now. There is a pattern that often happens when awareness increases at the beginning of a week. At first, the shift feels subtle. Nothing dramatic happens immediately. You move through familiar routines, you see familiar places, and the rhythm of your days looks similar to what it looked like before. But underneath those routines, something in your thinking begins to organize itself differently. Instead of rushing through tasks automatically, you begin noticing the purpose behind certain actions. Instead of reacting quickly to interruptions, you begin deciding which interruptions deserve your attention and which ones can simply pass by without response. This change may feel small, but it has a compounding effect as the days progress. For example, imagine a moment during the week when someone brings you a piece of information that normally would have triggered an immediate reaction. Perhaps it is criticism, perhaps it is a request, perhaps it is a suggestion that seems inconvenient at first. In the past, you might have reacted instantly, either defending yourself, rejecting the idea, or letting the comment affect your mood for the rest of the day. But when awareness is present, the moment unfolds differently. Instead of reacting instantly, you pause. In that pause, your mind has time to evaluate what is actually being said. Sometimes you may realize the information is useful, even if the tone was imperfect. Other times, you may recognize that the comment does not deserve emotional energy at all. That single pause protects your focus and allows the rest of the day to continue without unnecessary disruption. Moments like that are more important than they appear because they prevent your energy from being redirected by small distractions. Many weeks feel difficult not because something major went wrong, but because dozens of small distractions slowly drained attention away from what mattered. By the time the week ends, the person feels exhausted, even though nothing significant was accomplished. But when awareness guides your attention, those small distractions lose their power. They pass by without altering the direction of your day. Another shift you may notice during this week is a clearer sense of priority. When the mind is scattered, everything appears equally urgent. Emails, notifications, conversations, small tasks, and large responsibilities all compete for attention at the same level. That competition creates pressure because the mind feels as though it must respond to everything immediately. But when awareness increases, priorities naturally begin arranging themselves. Certain tasks clearly move something forward, while others simply maintain motion without producing meaningful results. Once that distinction becomes visible, your decisions become simpler. You naturally place more energy into the actions that actually influence outcomes, and less energy into activities that only consume time. This shift often leads to another interesting result: momentum. Momentum does not always appear as a dramatic breakthrough. Often, it begins as a series of completed steps that previously felt difficult to start. When your attention is focused, beginning a task requires less mental resistance. Once the first step is completed, the second step feels easier, and gradually, momentum builds. By the middle of the week, you may find yourself moving through responsibilities more efficiently than you expected, simply because the mental friction that once slowed you down has been reduced. Momentum also influences conversations. When your thinking becomes clearer, the way you speak naturally becomes more direct. You begin expressing ideas with less hesitation. Instead of circling around a point, you state it calmly and clearly. This often changes how others respond to you. People tend to mirror the clarity they encounter. When they hear someone speak with calm certainty, they often respond with more honesty and cooperation. As a result, discussions that once felt complicated may resolve faster than expected. There is another reason this week carries quiet importance. When awareness rises, you become more sensitive to alignment. Alignment is the feeling that a decision, conversation, or opportunity fits naturally with the direction you are moving. Misalignment feels different. It feels forced, rushed, or unnecessarily complicated. When awareness is low, people often move into misaligned situations simply because they do not recognize the signal early enough. But when awareness is active, those signals become easier to notice. You may sense quickly when a plan does not fit the bigger direction of your life. You may recognize when a conversation is leading toward unnecessary conflict and choose to redirect it. You may see when an opportunity deserves attention and when it is simply a distraction disguised as urgency. Recognizing alignment early protects your energy. Instead of spending days correcting a decision that felt wrong from the beginning, you simply avoid stepping into that direction at all. That alone can transform how a week unfolds. You may also notice something interesting about time during the next few days. When attention is scattered, time often feels short and rushed. Hours pass quickly, yet little progress feels visible. But when attention is focused, time feels more spacious. You complete tasks more efficiently, conversations become more purposeful, and the day feels organized rather than chaotic. Many people believe time management is the key to productivity, but in reality, attention management plays an even larger role. When attention is directed intentionally, time naturally becomes more effective. As the week continues, these small shifts begin interacting with each other. Clearer thinking leads to calmer decisions. Calmer decisions lead to better conversations. Better conversations lead to useful information or cooperation. That cooperation leads to progress. Progress creates confidence, and confidence reinforces the clarity that started the entire process. By the end of the week, you may look back and realize that several situations resolved more smoothly than you expected. Something that once seemed uncertain may now have a clear direction. Something that once required effort may now feel natural. None of these changes may appear dramatic on their own, but together they create the feeling that the week moved differently than usual. That is the quiet power of starting with the right message. And in the final part of this message, you will understand the deeper purpose behind why this particular reminder reached you now, and how the awareness you have gained today may influence decisions not only during this week, but during the steps that follow after it. Chosen one, now we arrive at the final part of this message, and this is where the deeper meaning behind everything you have heard becomes clear. The purpose of hearing this before opening any other app was never about avoiding technology or avoiding the world around you. The purpose was about order. What reaches your mind first often becomes the foundation for everything that follows. When the foundation is noise, the rest of the day builds on confusion. When the foundation is awareness, the rest of the week builds on clarity. That is why this moment matters more than it might have seemed when the message first began. You may have noticed something already while listening to this message. Your mind likely slowed down slightly. Instead of jumping quickly between different thoughts, you may have started reflecting more carefully on the ideas being shared. That shift is exactly the kind of mental state that creates better decisions. It creates space between stimulus and reaction, and in that space, something powerful happens. You regain control of your direction instead of letting the day control you. Most people move through their week in reaction mode. They respond to the first notification, then the next one, then the next request, then the next unexpected situation. By the time the day ends, they feel as though they were carried through events rather than guiding them. But the difference between reacting and guiding often begins with something very small: awareness at the beginning of the process. When awareness arrives early, the rest of the day unfolds differently. This is why the message said that one message can change an entire week. It does not mean a magical event suddenly appears and transforms everything instantly. Instead, it means a shift happens in the way you interpret and respond to the events that are already forming around you. Once that shift occurs, the same week that might have felt chaotic suddenly begins to feel organized. The same conversations that might have created confusion begin producing clarity. The same opportunities that might have gone unnoticed begin standing out clearly. Another reason this message matters now is because you are entering a period where small decisions carry greater influence than they appear to. Sometimes life moves in long, quiet stretches where each week feels similar to the last. Then there are periods where several small decisions shape what happens next in ways that only become obvious later. This week is closer to that second type of moment. That is why awareness needed to arrive first. Imagine a simple example. During the week, someone asks for your opinion about something. In the past, you might have answered quickly without thinking deeply about the direction of your response. But because your awareness has shifted, you pause for a moment and consider the bigger picture. That pause leads you to give a clearer answer. That clearer answer influences how the conversation continues. The conversation influences a decision that is made later in the week. That decision opens a new possibility or prevents an unnecessary complication. None of those steps would appear dramatic by themselves, yet together, they shape the direction of the week. This is how many meaningful changes begin, through a chain of small moments connected by awareness. You may also notice something else in the coming days. Because your attention has been anchored early, you may feel less urgency to check every notification or respond immediately to every piece of information that appears on your phone. That small difference can create surprising calm. When you are not constantly reacting to new input, your mind remains steady enough to follow through on what actually matters. Tasks get completed more smoothly. Conversations remain focused. Ideas have space to develop instead of being interrupted. There is also a psychological effect that happens when you start the week with a sense of clarity. Confidence grows quietly. Confidence does not always mean feeling powerful or excited. Often, it simply means feeling steady. When your mind feels steady, you approach situations with less hesitation. Instead of wondering whether you are making the right move, You trust your ability to respond intelligently to whatever appears next. That trust allows you to move forward without the constant second-guessing that slows many people down. And as the week continues, the results of that steadiness begin appearing. You may notice that certain interactions go more smoothly than expected. You may find that a task you once postponed becomes easier to start. You may experience a moment where something that seemed complicated suddenly resolves itself with a straightforward decision. These outcomes are not random. They are the natural result of a mind that began the week in alignment rather than confusion. Another important thing to remember is that awareness is not something you use only once. It is something you return to repeatedly. Throughout the week, there will still be moments where distractions try to pull your attention away. There will still be notifications, unexpected conversations, and situations that attempt to rush your thinking. But because you started the week anchored, it becomes easier to recognize those moments and return your focus to what actually matters. That ability to return to awareness is the real strength behind this message. It means that even if a day becomes busy or unpredictable, you still have a way to reset your perspective. A single pause, a single breath, a single moment of reflection can bring your attention back to the clarity you started with. By the time this week ends, you may not remember every word of this message, but you may notice that something about the week felt different. Perhaps you handled situations with more calm. Perhaps you recognized an opportunity you might have overlooked before. Perhaps you avoided unnecessary stress because you chose not to react immediately to something that once would have pulled your attention away. Those small differences are the real outcome of hearing the right message at the right time. So before you move on to the rest of your day, remember this simple idea. The first message you allow into your mind can quietly influence everything that follows. When that message reminds you to slow down, observe, and think clearly, the entire structure of your week begins from a stronger foundation. If this message reached you at the right moment, take a second to acknowledge that awareness. Let it stay with you as you move into the rest of your day. And when the small moments of decision appear during the week ahead, remember that clarity arrived before anything else had a chance to shape your thinking. Sometimes that is all it takes to change the direction of an entire week. Chosen one, before this message truly ends, there is one final layer you need to understand. Because many people hear a message like this and treat it like a temporary moment of motivation, something that sounds good for a few minutes and then fades as soon as the rest of the day begins. But the reason this message needed to reach you before you opened anything else is because the order in which ideas enter your mind determines which ideas stay with you. If noise enters first, clarity has to fight for attention. If clarity enters first, noise loses much of its power. That simple shift is the real reason this message can influence an entire week. Think about how most weeks begin for people. They wake up, immediately check their phone, and the first things they see are other people's urgency, other people's opinions, other people's expectations, and other people's emotions. Before they even have time to think about their own direction, their mind is already reacting to external input. By the time they begin their work or responsibilities, their mental energy has already been pulled in several directions. That scattered attention follows them through the entire week. Every new notification becomes another interruption. Every small problem feels bigger than it really is. Every unexpected moment feels stressful because their attention never had a chance to anchor itself. But when awareness arrives first, the structure of the week changes. Instead of reacting to everything that appears, you begin selecting what deserves attention. That one difference creates a ripple effect across the next several days. Small decisions become clearer. Conversations feel less chaotic. Situations that once caused unnecessary stress begin to look manageable. The same environment that once felt overwhelming starts to feel organized. simply because your perspective is no longer scattered. Another reason this message matters is because you are entering a stretch of time where consistency will produce more results than intensity. Many people believe progress requires dramatic action or major change, but often, the most meaningful progress happens through small, consistent decisions made over several days. When your attention is stable, those decisions become easier to maintain. You begin following through on tasks that once felt difficult to start. You begin completing conversations instead of postponing them. You begin making small improvements that quietly accumulate until the results become visible. For example, imagine a simple situation where you choose to focus on one responsibility at a time instead of switching constantly between different tasks. That single change reduces mental friction. Reduced friction makes it easier to complete the task. Completing the task creates momentum. Momentum makes the next task easier to begin. By the end of the day, you may accomplish more than you expected, not because you forced yourself to work harder, but because you removed the distractions that previously slowed you down. This principle applies not only to work, but also to relationships and communication. When your mind is calm, your words tend to become clearer. Clear communication prevents misunderstandings that might otherwise grow into larger problems later in the week. A conversation handled calmly on Monday can prevent a conflict on Thursday. A decision made carefully on Tuesday can prevent confusion on Friday. These are the kinds of invisible advantages that come from beginning the week with awareness instead of noise. There is also something else that happens when awareness is present at the start of a week. Your ability to recognize opportunities increases. Opportunities rarely appear with dramatic announcements. Most of them look like ordinary moments at first. They might arrive as a question someone asks, a suggestion someone makes, or a small opening in a situation that previously seemed closed. If your attention is scattered, those moments pass unnoticed. But when your attention is steady, you recognize the potential inside those small openings. Sometimes, recognizing the opportunity is as simple as realizing that a conversation is moving in a direction where your input matters. Other times, it might be noticing that someone is open to an idea that previously seemed unlikely. Occasionally, it might be recognizing that a delay has created space for a better option to appear. These moments often happen quickly, and they only become meaningful if you are paying attention when they occur. This is why the message emphasized awareness earlier. Awareness is not about being constantly serious or analyzing everything. It is about staying present enough to notice when something deserves attention. When you notice those moments, you can respond thoughtfully instead of automatically. That thoughtful response often leads to outcomes that feel smoother and more aligned with what you are trying to accomplish. Another important thing to remember is that awareness protects energy. Throughout the week, there will still be distractions. There will still be moments when someone else's urgency tries to become your urgency. There will still be situations that attempt to pull your attention away from what you intended to focus on. But when you started the week with clarity, it becomes easier to recognize those distractions early. Instead of getting pulled into them automatically, you can choose whether they truly require your involvement. Protecting your energy in this way prevents the slow exhaustion that many people experience by the middle of the week. When energy is preserved, focus remains stable. When focus remains stable, progress continues steadily, rather than stopping and starting repeatedly. By the time the week reaches its final days, the effects of these small shifts become visible. You may notice that you handled certain situations more calmly than you would have in the past. You may see that conversations resolved more smoothly. You may recognize that tasks which once seemed difficult to begin were completed with less effort. None of these outcomes require dramatic change. They simply require attention that remains anchored instead of scattered. And that brings the message back to where it began. One message can change an entire week. Not because the message itself is magical, but because the message changes the starting point of your thinking. When the starting point changes, everything that follows builds on a different foundation. The same week that might have felt chaotic becomes structured. The same challenges that once seemed overwhelming become manageable. The same opportunities that once passed unnoticed become visible. So as you move forward from this moment, remember what actually happened here. You gave your mind a moment of clarity before anything else had the chance to shape it. That single decision already altered the direction of your attention. And attention, more than almost anything else, determines how the days ahead unfold. Sometimes the difference between an ordinary week and a meaningful one begins with something this simple: hearing the right message before the noise begins. Chosen one, before this message fully closes, there is one final realization that often arrives only after a person has already begun moving through the week with awareness. At first, the message simply feels like guidance, a reminder to slow down and pay attention. But a few days later, something interesting often happens. You begin noticing that the moments which shape your week are rarely the loud ones. They are the quiet decisions you make when no one is watching. They are the small choices about where to place your attention, how long to stay in a conversation, when to pause before reacting, and when to step forward with clarity instead of hesitation. These quiet decisions accumulate faster than most people realize, and by the time the week ends, they create an entirely different experience from the one you might have had if you had begun the week in distraction. Another thing many people notice after hearing a message like this is how quickly the world tries to reclaim their attention. The moment you return to your normal routines, notifications appear again, conversations resume, responsibilities begin calling for responses. None of those things are inherently negative, but they all compete for the same limited resource: your focus. When focus is constantly divided, the mind becomes reactive again, and the clarity that started the week slowly fades into the background. But when you remember the awareness that began this message, you gain the ability to reset your attention, even in the middle of a busy day. Sometimes that reset is as simple as pausing for 10 seconds and asking yourself a single question. Is what I'm focusing on right now actually moving my week forward? If the answer is yes, continue with intention. If the answer is no, redirect your attention before more energy is lost. There is a powerful psychological effect behind this practice. When you repeatedly bring your attention back to what matters, the mind begins training itself to recognize meaningful moments more quickly. Instead of drifting from one distraction to the next, your thoughts begin moving with direction. Direction creates progress, and progress builds confidence. Confidence then reinforces the habit of focusing intentionally. Over time, this cycle becomes self-sustaining. What began as a single reminder at the start of the week gradually becomes a new way of moving through everyday situations. Another insight that often appears during a week like this involves patience. Many people expect meaningful change to happen immediately after hearing an encouraging message. They want to see results the same day. But real shifts usually unfold more quietly. The first few days may simply feel calmer. Conversations may become slightly clearer. Small tasks may feel easier to complete. These changes seem minor at first, but they signal that the internal environment of your thinking has already shifted. Once the internal environment stabilizes, external progress begins appearing naturally. Sometimes the progress reveals itself through unexpected timing. A message arrives when you are just thinking about a particular question. A conversation brings information that answers something you wondered about earlier in the week. A delay that initially seemed frustrating suddenly prevents you from making a rushed decision. When these moments occur, many people describe them as coincidence, but often they are simply the result of being attentive enough to notice connections between events that others might overlook. One of the most powerful outcomes of beginning the week with awareness is the sense of calm authority it creates in your decisions. When your mind is clear, You no longer feel pressured to respond immediately to every situation. You recognize that taking a moment to think rarely causes harm, while reacting too quickly often creates complications. That calm authority becomes visible to other people as well. Your tone becomes steadier. Your words become more deliberate. Instead of sounding uncertain, you sound composed. People respond differently when they encounter that composure. Conversations become more respectful. Requests become clearer. Cooperation becomes easier.
Another change you may notice is how your relationship with time begins to shift. Many people experience time as something that is constantly running out. They rush through tasks, worry about deadlines, and feel as though the day is always shorter than expected. But when attention is focused, time begins to feel more spacious. You move through tasks, one at a time, instead of jumping between them. Each completed action provides closure before the next begins. This rhythm reduces the feeling of being overwhelmed and allows progress to build steadily across the week.
As the final days of the week approach, the cumulative effect of these small adjustments becomes clearer. You may notice that situations which once felt stressful resolved themselves without drama. You may realize that certain conversations were more productive than usual. You may even recognize that you handled challenges more calmly than you would have in the past. None of these outcomes require a dramatic turning point. They simply require the kind of awareness that was introduced at the beginning of this message.
And that brings us back to the central idea that started everything.
One message can change an entire week, not because it controls what happens around you, but because it changes how you meet what happens around you. When you meet situations with distraction, the week becomes reactive. When you meet them with awareness, the week becomes intentional. The environment may remain the same, but your experience of it transforms.
So as you move forward from this moment,
remember the simple principle behind everything you just heard. Protect the order of your attention. Let clarity enter before noise whenever possible. Give yourself small pauses throughout the day to reset your focus. Notice the quiet moments where decisions matter more than they appear. When you do this consistently, you begin shaping your weeks instead of being carried through them.
And sometimes that is all it takes.
Not a dramatic breakthrough, not a sudden transformation, but a single moment of awareness that arrives early enough to guide everything that follows.